Right, we're recording. Yes, welcome to the first of probably 4 sessions that Paul is going to do on the Teffilot of the upcoming High Holy Days. We don't know whether we're going to be allowed to be in shul or not, but even if we are, or even if we're not, I'm sure that what we will learn over the next few weeks on this will stand us in very good stead. I'm going to hand over to Paul. This is being recorded, so anybody that, like me, can't stay for the whole thing can listen to it afterwards. I'll put it up on YouTube as usual, and hopefully everybody that wants to listen to it will be able to. So over to you, Paul. You are also a co-host, so you have the ability to mute people and unmute them sometimes. That doesn't always work. So I suggest that you get up your list of participants, if you haven't already, on the right-hand side of your screen, and then you can see what's going on. All right?
All right.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Avril has a hand up. Does that mean something substantial, or are we going to remove the hand? Right. Okay, so welcome. Yes, as Johnny has just said, the purpose of this course is to revise and talk through and come up with some thoughts about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then tag on to that, I suppose, Sukkot and Shemini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, which is all going to be very weird this year, because I suppose more than any other service, or equal to others, I suppose, but quite high up in the list, is Simchat Torah, which without a shul and a Sefer Torah sort of will be a bit weird. Anyway, we'll come to that in due course. So the sort of plan that I have in mind is that we will have today, let me see if I've got something here. Yeah, so I've got this little overview that I've put together of what we're going to be doing. So over the next 4 weeks, today we're going to be having a look at a general overview of Rosh Hashanah, and that is also going to include, hopefully we'll have time, a look at Elul, which is starting tonight. Today is the last day of Av, and tomorrow will be the first day of Elul, which is very nicely positioned, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that shortly. Then we will move on next week to Rosh Hashanah first day, and the following week we will look at Rosh Hashanah second day, which means that on the 4th week we will be able to look at Yom Kippur. Sorry, that's next week is, yeah, today, okay, I think that's right. And then it gives us another week, 2 weeks to look at Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot. We'll see how we go. I'm not sure how quite quickly things will proceed, but we'll see. And I'm going to try and make sure that this suits and people, whether they will be davening at home or in shul. Because one of the things that's going to be very different this year is that often, if we are, whether we're at shul or we're all in shul normally, aren't we? So it's going to be very different this year because we rely so much on what is going on within the shul, but the chazan and the rabbi and whoever's doing what, the person who's doing the laning, shofar blower, that we can happily be part of the audience sometimes, and we rely on the shul to keep us going. Well, this year, for most of us, if not all, it's going to be one where we have to take the initiative ourselves very much. And that's what I'm going to try and hope, that everyone will take something away that they will be able to use, because without your own initiative, it's going to just be a damp squib. And we don't want that on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Now, just before I forget, I would like to ask you, because we're not going to be using Maxa this week, but we will be using one next week. And I would like in advance, if you could, in the chat button or send me a separate note, if you could tell me which is your Maxa of choice, the one that you will be using. So is it Art Scroll? Is it Routledge, Birnbaum, all these wonderful names of old? Or have you got one of the books from the shul? Also, if you haven't got a Maxa at all and you're at home, then we need to help you get one, I think. So let me know if you haven't got a Maxa and you feel you would like one. We can either lend you one from the shul or organize some purchases to be made. I don't know if people did bring their books with them when they made Aliyah, or if they do rely on the shul supply. Let me know, and we can then make use of that information. Okay, so let's just run through my little slides here, if I may. See, how do we get to slideshow? Okay, well, the slideshow. So let's start at the beginning. So we had, that was the last slide. This is the first slide. So a refresher course of some of the customs, rules, and prayers of the Yamim Noraim. And now the first part is going to be Rosh Hashanah, which is going to be today, and the next one and a half weeks, 2 weeks. We'll see how we go. And the year, Hebrew year about to start is, I believe, 5781, which in Hebrew characters is Taf, which means 400. If you remember your number values of the alphabet, the last letter of the alphabet, of the Hebrew alphabet, is 400. The penultimate is Shin, which is 300. Add those together, you get your 700. Then the Pei is 80, and your Aleph is 1. Hang on a second, I hear you say we've got 5,000. Why haven't we? Why do we never mention that in the Hebrew date? Well, for whatever reason, the number values stop at 400. So if you wanted to say 5,000, you'd have to write the last letter, I don't know, 30 times or something to get up to your, no, more than that, to get up to 5,000. So the general rule of thumb is that we know it's 5,000. That's really a bit irrelevant until we move up to the year 6,000, which none of us will actually be involved with, unless lots of things change. Then we just ignore that and we know it's 5,000. So yeah, that's how that comes about. So then we're going to go on to the second slide, which 3 people in the waiting room. Hold on a second. Admit. Oh. Right. Why are they not coming in? Right, they're coming in. Now, my second slide then is what we're going to do today. And we're going to look at a Rosh Hashanah overview, and then that's going to take a bit of time. We're going to look at the month of Elul. What changes happen in the month? There's Psalm 27, there's shofar blowing, there's Slichot. We're going to look at that. Then if we can move on to the next slide. Hold on, people are still joining in. So let's get rid of that now. Next week, the idea will be to look at Rosh Hashanah, look at the Matzah, look at the davening, and we're going to start next week with the first day. So we'll go through all the services, the laning and the Haftorah. There's no shofar blowing because it's Shabbat. We'll talk about that. The Musaf service and the afternoon service. So there's ever so much to get through in 1 hour. We can only look at the highlights. And in your message to me, incidentally, if you have got anything that you've always wondered about, that you're not sure about, or that you don't understand, can you put that in as well? Because I want to cover anyone's own concerns, so no one else will know about it if you just message me, and I will try and incorporate that in what I say in the coming weeks. And the final slide is the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Evening service, morning service. We'll just look at the differences, obviously, from the first day. It's mainly the same, but not quite. The laning and the Haftarah, which are completely different, and shofar blowing, which appears on day 2 only this year, and Musaf service, briefly, and afternoon service. And if we have time in 2 weeks' time, we'll also look at some of the customs that we have on Rosh Hashanah. And then hopefully by then I would have looked at what I'm going to do for Yom Kippur, and I'll produce a similar little thing like this, so we know what we're going to be trying to do over the coming period of time. Now, my introduction, which I'm going to start now, so let's get rid of this actually. Stop share, and you can see me. Is based on Rabbi Sachs's introduction in the Koren Rosh Hashanah Machzor, which came out a few years ago. In fact, it's 10 years ago now, nearly 9 years ago. And yeah, it's nice. I'm not going to do it all because it's page after page, but if you do have one of these Machzorim, then this one, if you remember, like that. It's worth reading. So I'm going to pick out some highlights because I think it's important to set the scene. Right. I'm not sure if anyone is trying to get in. I'm trying to look. Thank you for sending your messages. Remind me to look at them before we close off. So, the 10 days of starting with Rosh Hashanah and ending with Yom Kippur are the holy holies of Jewish time. The atmosphere in the synagogue, and he's going to keep talking about the synagogue, which makes us realize how important the synagogue has become in our lives and how we have to readapt this year. The atmosphere is intense. Well, sometimes it is, and sometimes it's just very noisy with lots of people coming in and out. But anyway, let's imagine the atmosphere is intense. And everyone comes to shul, even if they never come to shul. And in England, it used to be that everyone came to shul. I think by the time I'd left, that really wasn't the case anymore. People were coming, certainly maybe to outside shul, but I think less and less people were actually going inside. But be that as it may, we do know that lots of people who never normally get involved with Jewish life do have an attraction to it or a feeling for it on Rosh Hashanah, and perhaps even more so on Yom Kippur. And first of all, I suppose if I say to any of you, what does Rosh Hashanah mean to you, you will probably say how important the shofar is, because that is a bit of a highlight. It is almost unique in the Jewish year, and it doesn't happen so much nowadays, but in the old days when people blowing the shofar tried really hard, bless them, but sometimes it went a bit disastrously wrong. So it's often an occasion where people get a bit embarrassed or laugh or whatever it is. Hopefully that won't happen this year, but it can happen because it's not easy to blow the shofar. As a shofar blower myself, you just never know when it's going to go wrong. Incidentally, last week we visited a shofar making factory up in the north of the country, which is really an interesting place. If you're ever up there, it's worth an hour of your time, where you can actually see how a shofar is taken and it's taken from the animal and ends up as a proper shofar. We'll talk about that when we look at shofar in 2 weeks' time. So we've got the shofar, and we also have the shul. The synagogue becomes, if you will, like a courtroom. God himself is the judge, and the shofar announces that the court is in session, And we, as individuals and as a people as a whole, are on trial, and we're giving an account of our lives. And if you get into the right mode, it can be quite a life-changing experience. And it makes us ask questions of ourselves, like, who am I? Why am I here? How shall I live? How have I lived till now? How have I used God's greatest gift, which is time? Who have I done wrong to? How can I put it right? Many questions we can ask about ourselves, and trying to do things differently, better in the year ahead. So Rosh Hashanah and of course Yom Kippur have retained an undiminished hold on the Jewish imagination, as we've already said. So thinking about it, if I say to you, hold on, Rosh Hashanah is a really important festival. Everyone comes to shul, it's a big thing. There must be lots about it in the Torah, which is where everything comes from that we do. Everything comes from the Torah. If it's not in the Torah, it doesn't exist. You can't just make it up, can you? So we need to have Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. And yes, it's sort of there, but it's not what you expect. So it's only mentioned obliquely, really, twice in the Torah. You compare that with Pesach, Shavuot and Sukkot. There's far more mention, there's far more detail of what's supposed to happen on those festivals. Yet, here we have something quite different. So we're going to try and share our screen and show you the first. Is this the first one? Yes. We're going to try and share our screen. Okay, so you can see here, if we look at chapter 23 of Leviticus, and I'm going to take you down, because it starts off that these are my fixed times, says God, and starts with Shabbat. 6 days' work may be done. On the seventh day is Shabbat. The set times, and then we start with the festivals. On the first month, and think about that for a moment. On the first month of the 14th day of the month, we have Passover, Pesach. Yom lachodesh hazeh, Chag hamatzot l'Hashem. Great, and then we carry on with a bit of detail about it and the offerings, and we move on to the second festival, which is Shavuot. Talking about sheaves of offerings and the hold on, where are we? 7 weeks, right? Shavuot, Hamishim, 50 days. Then we move on to the next one, which is the sacrifices again. So the next one in the list is indeed Rosh Hashanah, but it isn't really Rosh Hashanah. This is what it says. The Lord said to Moses, Daber el bnei Israel, speak to is the children of Israel, Lemor, b'chodesh hashavi'i, on the 7th month, be'echad lachodesh, on the first day of the month, yeh lachem Shabbaton, zichron teruah mikra kodesh. So that means in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you should observe complete rest, a sacred occasion commemorated with loud blasts. Teruah. That's all we get, teruah. Okay, can you think about that for a moment? I'm just going to try and put up on the screen the second verse, which is here. Now, in order to do that, I have to stop share and reshare. So let's try that. Here is the second extract from the Torah, and here we're going to look at Numbers, Bamidbar chapter 29, verse 1. Starts off talking about what we now know as Rosh Hashanah. Uvachodesh HaShavi'i, That's weird, isn't it? On the 7th month, be'echad lachodesh, on the 1st day of the month, mikra kodesh, yihyeh lachem. You're going to have a sacred day, a mikra kodesh, sacred occasion. Kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu. Melacha is work. Melechet avodah lo ta'asu. All work, your occupations will cease. You're not going to do any work. Yom Teruah, there it is again. Yihyeh lachem. It will be for you a day when the horn is sounded. Slightly different translation from before, but basically, that's it. We then move on to the offerings, which are not very exciting for us at all nowadays. And that's it. And then this one carries on and talks about Yom Kippur, and then moves on. So that's all we get, ladies and gentlemen, in the Torah. Not a lot. And just try and bear in mind some of those things that we've mentioned there, because it doesn't really tell us anything at all about what we do on the festival. It just mentions this word teruah. Well, what on earth is that? It doesn't say anything about 100 notes, 30 notes, tekiah, shavarim, teruah, no clues at all. So if we're relying on our Torah, then we're not going to get very far. It doesn't even, if you notice, use the expression, the words Rosh Hashanah. Doesn't say it, does it? And it refers to it as the first day of the 7th month. Tishrei is the 7th month, which is even now today. When we start counting our months, we start with Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul is 6. Tishrei is number 7. Because Pesach, or Nisan, the 1st of Nisan, is really the beginning of the year from an agricultural purpose. And even in the Torah, they keep that numbering. So Rosh Hashanah is not really properly defined in the Torah, and it certainly gives you no indication that that should be the most important period of the Jewish year. No indication at all. So we need to try and get into that and try and find out what happened from when God gave the Torah to Moses, to Moshe, what happened between then and now to really change things quite dramatically. So I just want to talk about what Rosh Hashanah is, and then we'll try and find out a bit more about how it developed. So first of all, we notice it said it's the first day of the 7th month. And the number 7, I just want to dwell on that for a few minutes, especially when applied to time, always signifies holiness. So we can think of the 7th day. The 7th day of the week is Shabbat, and that, of course, is a holy day, no work on that day. The land and the people enjoy, the people enjoy rest. What about the 7th year? The 7th year, the sabbatical year. Again, it's a special day, no work, and even the land has to enjoy rest. Debts are released. And what happens again on the 7th, the end of the 7 year, 7 times 7, the Jubilee year, again, it's a special day in the Jewish calendar. So also the 7th month fits this pattern. It is to the year what Shabbat is to the week, if you like. It's clearly a special month. And it also, as I say, marks stopping work. And if we look at it further, we will find out that Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the completion of creation. So we say, we learn that it started, 7 days started on the 25th of Elul, and then if you count up 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 6 days, 6 days, have I got that right? Hold on a second. Very good. Yeah, 6 days, and then man was created on the 1st of Tishrei. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 30. Yes, because it's 29 days, right. It's not 30. Let's do that again. 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and then the first of Rosh Hashanah is day 6 of creation. That is when it was all finished and man was created. That's the first thing you need to remember, because it pops up a lot in our davening, and next week we'll see, if you try and hold that in your mind, we'll see how many times creation appears in our prayers. God the Creator, which compares perhaps with God, who is also the Redeemer and the Revealer. He redeemed us, like on Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, are different in many ways, because they talk about God as being our Redeemer and looking after us as Jewish people, whereas Rosh Hashanah is really talking about the creation and the celebration of the universe as God's work. And in fact, we'll see in our prayers, you may notice, hopefully we'll try and point it out, but a lot of the prayers are not so much about being Jewish, like they are in Pesach, etc., but it's more to do with universal, to the world as a whole. It's not just us we're talking about as Jews, it's people, the whole universe. The next key string of Rosh Hashanah is all about God as King, Melech. Okay, it really is important, and perhaps we don't appreciate how important it is in our day and age, because the word king, or for those that know England, for example, where we have a queen who has been there for a long, long time. You know, if you think about Queen Elizabeth, she's such a sweet lady. She's been on the throne for so long. She has to sign all these documents. But you're not going to think about her in the way that a king or a queen of old was. You've probably seen films about the queens and the kings. King Henry VIII, for example, you know, they have real power. Whatever they raise their hand and things happen, they kill people just like that. So we've lost that feeling of what is a king. But we have to just understand that when we talk about God being Melech, that we're talking about something much more extreme to that which we are used to. And here we have the connection, perhaps one of the connections and the reasons that we have our shofar. We're talking about it more when we talk about the shofar. But one of the times the shofar was regularly used over the years, and you can see it in the texts in the Nevi'im and Melachim, that when kings were appointed, the shofar was blown, and that was an announcement of the new king and the coronation of the king. Okay. Now, even in our davening during the week, and especially in Nusach Safars, which we use in our shul, there is a lot of reference to God as king. If you read the davening in Shacharit, especially, but not only, it keeps popping up, Melech, Melech, Melech. It's all over the place. And we even say, as I say, there's this special little phrase that every morning is said in Poleg, as a Nusach Safar, that we say, the reader says it and the congregation repeats it twice. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloch. The Lord is king, the Lord, I don't remember where it goes. The Lord was king and the Lord will be king. So it's said out loud to make sure we all understand God is ruling and he's in charge of everything that happens in our world. Okay, so that is the second part of Rosh Hashanah. The first part is anniversary of creation. Second part is God is the king. And the shofar sort of joins in with that. Now I want to try and address the issue of how on earth did Rosh Hashanah become such an important thing when it hardly gets a mention in the Torah. Okay, just give me 1 second. I'll make sure no one is stuck trying to get in. I don't think they are. Okay. So let's pull up my next slide. I'm going to share the screen, and we're going to go to Nehemiah. think that's what we'd like to have on the screen. Hopefully you can see it. Right, why are we talking about that? Because the anniversary of creation, the kingship renewal ceremony, that's how it might have stayed. But things happened in history. They're happening now. I mean, lots of things happening in our time that are historical. This pandemic will go down as a historical event. Our grandchildren, great-grandchildren will know about it, maybe. The peace with the Arab countries, is that going to develop, or is that going to be a damp squib? We'll see. If it happens, it will be amazing. But if we go back to the times when the Jewish people did live in Israel, the destruction of the temple and the Babylonian exile were a complete trauma for the Jewish people, physically and spiritually. It really shook them completely. The whole world, they thought, was coming to an end. The temple had gone, and everything was based around the temple. And Judaism and the Jewish people may well have just disappeared at that time. That's what happened to the 10 tribes of the Northern Kingdom. We know when they got invaded, they all disappeared. We had a little talk a couple of weeks ago about the possibility of finding some of these lost tribes, and it does seem that it's convincing that there are. And also, a few weeks before that, Dr. Lieberman also gave a talk about the possibility of lost tribes still existing. But really, there's no certainty. But the Southern Kingdom, Judah, was strong from a Jewish point of view. And there was always this talk from Moshe to Yirmiyahu about exile and return. So there was hope. And there was always a continuity going on there. However, when the Jews were allowed to come back into Israel, not many of them did go. I think many of you have studied that recently. And it was a bit of a mess, but they came back and they managed to rebuild the temple. But the Jewish nation itself was in a mess, as I said, disarray. Religious knowledge was very poor. Many had intermarried with the local populations. They couldn't even speak Hebrew. Half of their children spoke the language of the locals and didn't know how to speak the language of Judah, which is Hebrew. And I want to just read this little story, which we find towards the end of the Tanakh, where Nehemiah is bringing the people back, and this is what he does. Because he realizes he's got to do something, because it's not going to work unless there's a massive reinvention of the Jewish religion, if you like. So this is what is written down in chapter 8. The entire people assembled as one man in the square before the water gate, and they asked Ezra the scribe, who worked with Nehemiah, to bring the scroll of Moshe with which the Lord had charged Israel. On the first day of the 7th month, aha, we recognize that. We now know that's the first day of Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah. But at the moment, it's not such an important day. It happens to be the day that Ezra, the priest, brought the Torah to the congregation, and everyone could listen and hopefully understand it, because he read it all day, from the first light until midday, all morning, to the men and the women and those who could understand. The ears of all the people were given to the scroll of the Torah. Ezra, the scribe, stood upon a wooden tower made for the purpose. So he was up high, he was reading the Torah, and you got all these people with very strange names. Some of them you might recognize, but that shows you how much they've all assimilated. And they were standing by him because they were helping to translate. So he opened up the scroll, but he was above all the people. And as he opened it, everyone stood up. Ezra blessed the Lord, and everyone said, Amen. So this is where, if you think about it, just divert for a second. When we do Baruch Hu et Hashem Amavorach, before we read the Torah, that's what Ezra is doing here. And everyone replies, Amen, Amen. Or we say, Baruch Hu, Baruch Hashem Avarach Elam Va'ed. They bowed their heads and they prostrated themselves to the ground. We don't do that anymore. So these people were explaining it to the people. To these people with the funny names were explaining the Hebrew words to the rest of the congregation while they stood in their places. So you can imagine, it's a bit like what we do on Simchat Torah in the shul, where you have half a dozen different readings. Well, here you've only got one reading, but you've got the men standing around talking in small groups and translating what is going on so that everyone understands. Otherwise, they wouldn't understand. And Nehemiah said, this day is holy. You mustn't mourn or weep. You've got to be happy on this day, because he was upset to see that people were weeping. Why were they weeping? Because they realized what a mess they were in and how much hard work they were going to have to do to get back to some sort of a knowledge of the Torah. He said further, go and eat some choice foods and drink sweet drinks and send gifts to people who've got nothing ready. For today is a holy day to our Lord. Don't be sad. Rejoice in the Lord. Rejoice in the Lord is the source of your strength. So they were quietening people down, because you know what happens when a lot of Jewish people get together, it all gets noisy, people start talking and crying and laughing and hush. There's always someone that likes to say hush. But the day is holy, do not be sad. Well, everyone went to eat and drink, and they sent gifts to each other, and they understood the things they were told. So things were looking great. I just want to finish off, because it says on the second day. Well, that's a new thing. That wasn't in the Torah. We'll talk about that when we get to the second day of Rosh Hashanah. But here is a clue. That's the start of the second day of Rosh Hashanah. So they did the same thing again on the second day of the month of Tishrei, of the 7th month. And they did some Torah learning. So there we go. That was a sea change. And I imagine that they wrote that down in their diaries, and every year they made a big event, and perhaps it grew from there gradually, year after year. It had different things which developed from it. And indeed, over the course of the next 5 centuries, new institutions emerged, shuls came about, houses of study, which allowed Jews to survive, and it allowed them to celebrate the festival of Rosh Hashanah amongst the Rosh Hashanah. Because don't forget, it's only the 3 foot festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, that people needed to go to the temple themselves. So Rosh Hashanah is really more of a synagogue festival than a temple festival. Although there were special offerings that were made on that day when the temple was standing. And this now connects us up with the next important word relating to Rosh Hashanah, which is the word teshuvah. The word teshuvah, which we know well, although it's a bit difficult to understand what it means, but it does certainly mean returning. And we're going to look at that in a second. Just find my place here. Hold on one second. Yeah, so teshuvah it means 2 things really. It can either mean returning in a physical way, and of course that's what the people at the time of Nehemiah and Ezra were doing. They were returning back to the land of Israel, leaving Babylon, coming back, returning to teshuvah physically. But then, in conjunction with that, the idea of teshuvah and how it relates to Rosh Hashanah is, of course, where we all have the opportunity to come back spiritually, and that's not such an easy thing to do, but this is the time that we do it. Fine. So also in the ex-chief rabbi Sax's words, he talks about other things that we'll talk about in the coming weeks, and he also wants to make it a very important point that it's up to us as individuals to deal with all these matters. We can't rely on the community. How true this year? As I mentioned already earlier, the individual responsibility is very, very strong. And unless we as individuals take.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah. Hello.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello? Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
When this process of praying and doing all the things that God told us to do, we know in our history that we have really suffered for a long, long time with, and now we're in another suffering with this modern day plague. How did the people maintain their enthusiasm to keep coming back year after year, going through this whole process, and at the end of it all, have a king start murdering them, or have a virus come and kill everybody? How did we continue to maintain, in the face of reality of what was actually happening to us, that we could keep doing this year after year after year and come back and do it again?
Okay, that's a really good point. Can we park that and we'll have space?
Oh, sure.
And we'll
No problem.
talk about it, because that is, you know, that's
No
quite
problem.
a question. But good point, very good point. Right, so I just wanted to say, yeah, it is important for us to remember it's our responsibility, especially this year, to make sure it happens. The last couple of paragraphs of his introduction I would like to read to you, and then we'll move on to a few things about Elul. So he says, the Hebrew verb lehitpalel, which means to pray, means more precisely to judge oneself. On Rosh Hashanah, we stand in judgment. We know what it is to be known, and although we know the worst about ourselves, God sees the best. And when we open ourselves to him, he gives us the strength to become what we truly are. Those who fully enter the spirit of Rosh Hashanah emerge into the new year, charged, energized, focused, renewed, knowing that to be a Jew is to live life in the presence of God, to sanctify life for the sake of God, and to enhance the lives of others. For where we bring blessings into other lives, there God lives. That's a nice little ending. Worth reading the whole thing if you've got that book. And I found that very interesting. So I'm going to move now, which is still showing stop share. Going to move now to yeah. Go back to here so I remember what we're going to do. This is today. Rosh Hashanah overview, we've done. Oh, share screen. Share screen is gone. Hold on a second. This is where it all gets confusing for me as an amateur. Share screen. Okay, you're back with the screen. Lovely. Rosh Hashanah overview, we've just done. Done. Thank you very much, except we're going to have to talk about the point just raised. Now we want to have a talk about the month of Elul, which is not happened yet. It's going to happen tonight. Just remind you, there are 2 days of Rosh Chodesh this month, today and tomorrow. And the rule is, if you remember, what is the rule? That if a month has got 29 days, then Rosh Chodesh is on the first day of the next month. Okay, first day of the next month. If a month has got 30 days, because that's the choice, some months have got 29, some months have got 30. A couple of them vary from year to year, the others are fixed. If the month has got 30 days, like the month of Av, then we have 2 days, which is the last day of Av plus the first day of Elul, which is tomorrow. So if you've got only one day Rosh Chodesh, you immediately know, without thinking and looking at a calendar, aha, that is the first day of the new month. Likewise, if you've got 2 days Rosh Chodesh, like now, you immediately know that the first day is the last day of the old month, and the second day of Rosh Chodesh is the first day of the new month. So Elul will be coming in tonight when it gets dark and will last for 29 days. So the exception to the rule I've just mentioned is Rosh Hashanah itself. When for reasons that are not too clear, but we'll talk about them again, we forget that Rosh Hashanah is also Rosh Chodesh, and we just don't address it at all. We don't do the special laning for Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah. We don't bless it the week before in Shul on the Shabbat before every month. We bless the new month. We don't do that on the week before Rosh Hashanah. So it's the fact that it is also the new month, the 1st and 2nd of Tishri. It's not the same rule as Rosh Chodesh. So the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah are not the same as 2 days Rosh Chodesh, if you see what I mean. If you don't, you can ask me later and I'll try and explain it again. So there we are. We are starting Elul. Elul is the month when we prepare. We get ready for the big day. It's like an acclimatization period. If you're climbing up a mountain, you don't just climb up on the 1st of Tishri. You prepare. If you're going for a sponsored run or a marathon, you don't just do your marathon. You spend weeks beforehand getting ready for the event. So that's what Elul is all about. It's getting everyone in the mood. And we do a few things. Starting from tomorrow morning, if you are davening with the Nusach Safard. But if you are a member of the Young Israel of North Netanya, where Ashkenaz rules supreme, then you will be from tonight, starting to say Psalm 27. Because, and it always annoy, these a few things annoy me about the differences between Sephardi and Ashkenaz, because they're so minor, the differences, but on the other hand, they're so major and they could so easily be combined together. So one of the differences is that Psalm 27, which we're going to look at in a sec, Ashkenazim say in the evening service and the morning service. Nusach Safard says it in the morning service and the afternoon service. Don't ask me why, but that's what happens. So it gets a bit confusing, and we say it until the end of Sukkot, to Hoshana Rabbah. So it's a long time, and it goes on. So let's have a look now, if I can organize this, to find Psalm 27, here we go. Now I have to share it. Should be so much easier than this. Share screen, there we go. Okay, we have it. Psalm 27. So in Hebrew, and perhaps more commonly known in its Hebrew words, the David Hashem Ori. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom should I fear? And it's of David, for David, by David, one of the Psalms. The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Whom should I dread? We're not going to read it all, but we're going to just look at these highlighted in yellow. There's a bit down here and a bit down here, just to try and see where the connection becomes with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So I've always found it quite hard to work out where the connection, certainly for Yom Kippur, comes from. But I'm told by our rabbinical ancestors that the Lord is my light is a reference to Rosh Hashanah, and my salvation is a reference to Yom Kippur. So let's accept that. And then it talks about, hold on just 1 second. Yeah, it talks about the fact that God will never reject us, even if our parents do. He gives us confidence in hard times and the courage to face our enemies without fear. It's said, as we say, for all these days. So I'm just going to, should an army besiege me, my heart would have no fear because God's there. And then we talk about living in, here we are, next one, next connection. One thing I ask the Lord, only that I do only that do I seek, to live in the house of the Lord. Well, it's not really the house of the Lord. The Hebrew word is Besukkah. That is translated as the house of the Lord. So the Sukkot, Sukkah, is there. The word is there. Good connection. Why do we keep reading it during Sukkot? He will, actually, I'm talking rubbish. Sukkah is there. Here's the translation. He will shelter me in his pavilion. His pavilion is the translation. And then we have the word in the next verse, Teruah. Teruah, shouts of joy, but we also know that as the sound of the shofar. So that's a great connection with Rosh Hashanah. And I suppose with Yom Kippur as well, because we do blow it then as well. Yeah, so that's the psalm that we're going to be saying. And I just want to draw your attention to something here, which I didn't know till I was doing this preparation. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Does anyone here come from, study at, achieve a degree at the University of Oxford? Let me just see if anyone, I can't really see if anyone, well, okay, maybe not. So I will tell you then, and I will share something with you, which is quite interesting. This here is the motto of the University of Cambridge. And it says in Latin, Dominima, no, go down the left-hand side, Dominus illumina Teo mea. And those of us who studied Latin will know immediately, Dominus illuminatio mea. Dominus? I don't know. Anyway, that's actually what it is the motto of the University of Oxford, and it's the opening words of Psalm 27, the Lord is my light. So there you go. Even they say it. They say it every day of the year, maybe. They're very worried now about what's going to happen with their income, because all the foreign students can't come or won't come, who knows. The next thing, I'm going to have to share that other screen again, otherwise I'm going to get lost, we want to talk about is, okay, share again. The shofar. It's really good if you're a shofar blower and you're able to blow the shofar during Elul, because again, you're practicing. You don't want to just suddenly wake up on Rosh Hashanah morning and blow the shofar for the first time. That is not a good idea, trust me. You need to do it regularly. You need to get your lips in the right fashion. So a good way of practicing is blowing it in shul, and we blow it every single morning during the month of Elul, starting from tomorrow morning. Just before we say Psalm 27, with one exception, of course, we do not blow it on Shabbat. We don't blow it on Rosh Hashanah on Shabbat, so we certainly don't blow it on a normal Shabbat. And also, we would normally not blow it on the day before Rosh Hashanah, the last day of Elul, because we want it to be a bit fresh. We can say Shehechianu when we blow the shofar, but this year, because we don't blow the shofar on Shabbat, we blow it for the first time on Sunday. It is customary to blow the shofar on the very last day of Elul as well, which will be Friday this year. Now, a question that arises is, first of all, not many people go to shul in the mornings, normally anyway, so they don't normally hear the shofar. My wife often has the privilege because I practice when I come home from shul. But the question is asked for those that normally go to shul and would like to hear the shofar. If there is no shul, or if I'm not going to shul, do I need to blow the shofar myself? Well, first of all, this blowing of the shofar is not in any way a compulsory thing in the Jewish religion. It's very much a tradition. And if you don't blow the shofar, even in shul, if there's no one there to blow it or whatever, it doesn't really matter. How much more so then if there's no minyan, or if you're on your own at home, don't feel bad that you're not hearing the shofar, because it's not so important to hear it. Just think about it and then move on and recite the psalm itself. Okay. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we go to questions, including Mr. Jacobs, is Salichot. Again, a lot of people who are not regular shul goers in the morning.
Well, excuse me 1 second.
Yes.
On Rosh Hashanah, you're obliged to hear the shofar, aren't you?
Oh, yes, you certainly are. I'm talking about during Elul, only during Elul.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to it. But yes, that is a commandment to hear the shofar, not to blow it, but we'll talk about that further. Just during Elul, where we have the tradition of blowing it every morning, early in the morning, I just wanted to point out, in case anyone feels bad that they're not hearing it, that you shouldn't, because it's not high in the list of importance. Which also I didn't realize until recently. So when we went on holiday, I always used to take my shofar with me, make sure we blow it in the hotel room, wake everybody up. Now I'm told, if you're on your own, you don't need to do it. Okay, thank you very much. We live and learn. I want to just talk about for a few minutes, because it doesn't really relate to many people, but it's important, because if you do go to shul in the mornings, you will know that if you're Sephardi starting already now, tomorrow, because they do it for the whole month, but we won't talk about Sephardim, we're talking about Ashkenazim, which is us lot. We have the week before Rosh Hashanah, plus the week in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we use those days to say lengthy salichot. Salichot are prayers. I always used to call them saying sorry prayers, but really they're sort of asking for forgiveness prayers. I suppose it's sort of the same thing. From the Sunday before Rosh Hashanah, and you will all remember from your days in the previous countries that's first Saturday night at midnight. It became a bigger and bigger event with major choirs and major rabbis making speeches at midnight where everyone should be in bed. And the first night of Salichot became quite spectacular. And then after that, they were ignored. Well, there we go. You're supposed to say them every morning. There's a book of Salichot. The shul has a book if you want to borrow it. I use the one that was written by Rabbi Rosenfeld, which is sort of a reasonable translation, although it's still not very meaningful in this day and age. But there's loads of prayers. I mean, it's a phenomenon. It's a whole book. We do say smaller versions on the fast days, but these ones are particularly long, and there's a whole pattern to them. They begin in the same way. They have in the middle Shema Koleinu, Shema Koleinu, Hashem Elokeinu, and we say that every morning. We say Hashem, Hashem Erachum V'Chanun. You know, recognize that? Well, we say that several times every morning. We don't sing it. We rush through because we're only allotted 20 minutes for something that should really take an hour. So it's all done very quickly. Do we really know what we're saying? If we're going to do it, just concentrate on saying a few of them. Most of these salichot were written, interestingly enough, in Italy for whatever reason, and they were mainly written later on around the 7th century onwards, something like that. So they weren't there originally, I don't think. And when they first came in, they were mainly just between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then they developed as time went on. People wanted to do more and more to the week before. And as I say, Sephardim, because they've got many more sins perhaps, they have the whole month in which they can get in the mood for Rosh Hashanah. Well, there you go. I think that's one thing I just wanted to do before we move to any questions, which is, see if we can find it. Just wanted to play a couple of minutes of this. Share screen, stop share, share. we spoke about Elul. I just wanted to end with this. The first letters of the month of Elul are Aleph, Lamed, Vav, and Lamed. And they very nicely are the first letters of a lovely verse from Shir HaShirim, which we've all heard of. Ani Lododi V'Dodi Li. Okay, Ani begins with an Aleph. L Dodi is the second letter of Elul. V is also U. Elul. And then the last letter is V'Dodi is one word. And the Lamed at the end is the last letter of Elul. Ani Lododi V'Dodi Li is translated in Shir HaShirim as I am my beloved, and my beloved is mine. And it's a love song. We spoke about that, if you remember, 6 months ago when we talked about reading it at Pesach time. But it's taken also to mean the love between God and his people. So Ani Lododi V'Dodi Li means that we are coming near, Ani is us, I think, and we are coming near to our beloved, which is God, and our God is coming near to us. So Elul is a time when we get together more perhaps than any other time of the year. And it's very, very sweet. I suppose we have to all behave with our friends as well. Ani Lododi also means to other people. We have to start being nice to everybody, even in these difficult times, not losing our temper with our families and our friends. And yeah, just as a side thought, I suddenly thought to myself, now having learned a bit more Ivrit, if you ask a child, a Hebrew-speaking child, and you say to him, Ani Lododi V'Dodi Li, what does that mean? He will say to you, as I'm sure some of you will be thinking, I belong to my uncle, because Dod is an uncle, and my uncle belongs to me. And in fact, in modern Hebrew, Dodi doesn't mean beloved, it means my uncle. So what happened there along the route? I'm not sure, but I just thought I'd tell you about that because it's a bit weird. So just listen to this, and then I'll open up for comments, and we're trying to address Mr. Jacobs' point. Notice don't play with your shofar, but he's got his shofar. This is in a temp, is that in a, oh my gosh, I've chosen the wrong one. Anyway, it's a nice song. This is in a cathedral. See how careful you've got to be. And it's a woman singing. I mean, what more can you get? A woman singing in a temple, in a cathedral. Oh yeah, hey. Right, she looks happy anyway. So let's see if we can work out. Well, you can either unmute yourselves if you've got a point. But let's talk about Mr. Jacobs' question, which is quite important. But I guess it's you're talking about life and the world. The world is a series of ups and downs, isn't it? Whether you're Jewish or whether you're not Jewish, it's a cycle. There are some periods in the world's history where things are going well, not for everybody at the same time, but for some people in some countries. And they're at the same, simultaneously, there's other people who are suffering badly. And when you're talking about people, first of all, everyone has to die. So whether they die in this pandemic or another time, everyone's got to die. So you've got to face that fact. And I suppose the whole point is, if you don't have this central belief, then I don't know what people who don't believe in God or don't think about God, then what makes you want to carry on, really? I don't know the answer, but I'd be interested to hear if anyone else has got a comment to make about this interesting subject. And if you've got any questions at all, now is your chance. Hello, Marcel.
Yes, just to add from your starting point where you spoke about Taf Shin Pei Aleph, and you said that it didn't give the 5,000. In the Anglo-Saxon countries, it's not customary to add the hey in front, but in Eastern Europe, it's very customary to have a hey in front of the taf, which makes it 5,000, 5,700. You'll see it very, very often in print and cutting gravestones, etc., etc.
Thank you very much. That's right. I mean, it's important because, you know, things now last many centuries and millennium. So if you haven't got that, you haven't really got a clue.
I was thinking myself, why do I do it? I think if I ask the question publicly, I should be able to maybe answer a little bit of my own.
Yeah.
And while I was listening to your wonderful presentation, I started thinking to myself, so what motivates you, me? Where do I get my? And I was thinking, it's our tradition. That's what we do because we have hope that the next year will be better than the last year. And even when we see it hasn't been, we are a people who has eternal hope. No matter what we've been through, we keep looking to God to help us to the next time. And this provides us an opportunity to start again and not look back and be depressed or upset that what's the sense of doing it again? And I thought of it because people who practice little or no Judaism, they come back. And they come back because they want to be there to hear Kol Nidre. They may not even understand why, but there's something in the soul of a Jew that never forgets that we were slaves, and we're not slaves anymore. 6 million of us were murdered by the Germans, and we now have a state that we didn't have for 2,000 years. So I think that, I mean, I didn't think of this till I asked you the question, but I started doing some introspection. I mean, you don't ask the question unless maybe you can figure it out too. And that's what I figured out. I think that we're amazing people. Most other people just have faded completely away, and you don't find them anymore. Not us. We are truly God's people because we're still here, and our enemies are not here. And I remember when I first came to Israel, my wife and I went to a place, I don't remember the exact name, but there were about 100 young girls from a yeshiva that were there, and they were sitting and they were learning the history of this place. And I thought to myself, this is Roman history we're sitting on, and the Romans aren't here anymore, but we are. And I told those children, what an amazing situation we have in that you, in this year, 2000, whatever it was, 15, you're sitting right in the spot that the Romans had, and they're no longer here, but you are. You're here in a country that wasn't even yours at the time. It's an amazing reality.
Yeah, that's really nice thoughts there. Thank you very much. And it's a good time for this introspection. And as I said, a month of Elul is the time to do it. And yeah, it's very, very right what you say. Also, I think we should also remember, I think, obviously, if you get afflicted with corona, you're not going to agree. But on the whole, it's like a blip, isn't it, in the ocean? And generally, we are living through the best times, I think, for many, 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 many centuries, whatever it may be. You know, we can't complain. So on that thought, unless anyone else has a question, Next week, for those who want to come back, we will be tackling the actual governing. No more big speeches from me. And again, as I said, if any of you got your own questions or your own prayers that you'd like us to look at in a bit more detail, then let me know. Otherwise, we shall be trying to cover as much ground as we can. So there we go. Thank you for listening, and have a good Shabbat again, isn't it? Enjoy the new month, and the new Shabbat starts tomorrow. My goodness. Bye. All the best.
Right, the sofa. Oh,
So next week I want to hear it without any problems. Good luck. All the best. Cheers.
oh, yeah.